Configuring the Salesforce. That's
Uh,
what we're going to talk about.
okay, okay. Tomorrow morning. I will.
Okay, the first thing is configuring Salesforce that we're going to talk today. Configuring Salesforce is basically very small thing. A few small concepts in this which are very important for you to know. Uh, First is the personal setup. So while you're configuring Salesforce, first thing that you need to do is personal setup. Not just you, everyone in the company will need to do it. So this is how Salesforce works. Basically, you decide on how many licenses you need. Uh, you pick that, okay, fine, I need 10 licenses or 12 licenses, whatever number of licenses you need in Salesforce, and then they will give you that number of licenses and they will create one login for you. All right. So with that one particular login and all the number of licenses, the first login will be of an administrator, and this administrator will now have the right to go ahead and or access to go ahead and create other licenses, all right, other people's login ID and password. So whenever you create a login password for a user, let's assume you are the administrator. Now, once you are the administrator, you create a login ID password for a certain user. All that you have to do is that you have to just go ahead and create the login or the create the user basically. Okay, now that user needs to go and do his personal setup. Personal setup is things like any uh, information like the name, last name, sorry, first name, last name, email ID, login ID, phone, fax, time zone, the language, right? So these kind of information, right? So personal setup is something that every user can actually set up for himself or herself, right? So just give me a moment. Let me show it to you. Okay. So where do we have the option of personal setup? It's in setup under, sorry, just go to your name and click on my settings. This is where you have the personal setup. Okay. So go to my settings, personal setup. This is where you can set up your personal information. You can change your password, language, time zone. Okay, so these things can be done. All right. So that's how personal setup works basically. All right. So this is where a user will actually come and set his name, login ID, password, email, time zone, language, right? Okay. And all these options are available here. The personal information, then change password option is there. Here you can set up your name, city, street, state, address, email ID, everything can be set up here. Okay, nickname, everything. All right. So this is where you do your personal setup. So all the users for whom you have created the login ID password, they are supposed to come here and do the personal setup. That's one. Now let's go and talk about the company setup. And the next is company setup. Company setup is where you need to do the setup for the company. As an organization, the company's setup needs to be done, and that's something where the setup will be done for all the users in the company. Okay, so to do the company setup, you just need to go to setup, company profile. Okay, and here you have company information. Got it? So you can go and click on the company info and then edit the company info. In company info, you basically deal with the basic info of the company, which is like name, phone, address, things like this, website, phone, fax, things like this. That's the basic info of the company. You have local info of the company, which talks about which currency your company uses, whether you use dollars or whether you use Australian dollars or Indian rupees or what. Time zone it talks about, so you have the option of defining the time zone and the language. Okay, so you have the option of setting up the default language and time zone for the entire company. So you see, we have an option of defining time zone and language for the user also, right? So it's possible that the default language of the company is English, but some users of the company are, for them the language is French, because they might be, if I'm talking about a multinational company or a very big company, there can be users from different locations, right? So that's quite possible. So what we are setting in the company info is default time zone and the language. Let's say the default time zone of the company is Eastern time, but there can be a user in the Pacific time also. So that user actually needs to go and change his time zone in his personal setup. Got it? So what we are setting up in the company is the default information. See, the company's information is here and the local information is here. What is the default location? What's the default language? What's the default time zone? So this part is here. Right? And this is the address information, this is company information. Got it? So that's about the company's information, right? And we also set the currency here. Currency means which currency basically your company deals in. All right. So that's there. Apart from that, you have the fiscal year information set here. Okay. Fiscal year is what financial year your company follows. What kind of a financial year your company follows basically. Uh, you know, is it April to March or is it January to December? Why this fiscal year information is important? Can anyone tell me why is this fiscal year information important to be tracked for the company? How does it help in the database? Any one of you? I'm talking
uh,
about CRM, and why do I need to store fiscal year information in the CRM?
because if the company is public, they need to publish their numbers every year, every quarter.
Uh, that's fine, but how is that related to my CRM? They need to publish that something, that's somewhere else, right? How is that information important or critical for my CRM? How does it?
Customer can see that information and find out how the company is doing, how the company stock is doing, how the company did last year or last quarter. That's how the customer can make out if they want to buy their product or not.
So this database or the CRM
Maybe to
Salesforce, just one second, the CRM is not accessed by your customers, it's accessed by your sales team, right? Customers are not accessing it. Customers will access a newspaper where your balance sheet and P&L statements are published. Correct. So that's not the correct thing. Varun, you were saying something.
How many customers have contributed to how much income or profit?
Yeah, somewhere on the same lines. Basically, why we want to do the fiscal year or why we want to track the fiscal year here is because since we have the data here related to the revenue generation, sales, and all, basically the sales. So now sales reports are done using the fiscal years. Okay. So for you to do the reporting, because your sales are being tracked here, if you track the fiscal year also, or if you define your fiscal year properly, while you try to do reporting, later on we'll talk about reporting also in Salesforce. So while we try to do the reporting, it becomes very easy for you to create reports based on the financial year. And every company requires reports based on financial year. Companies need to see what kind of business they did in last quarter and the coming quarter. So for reports, forecasts, it becomes very helpful. All right. So if you have defined the correct fiscal year, all right. So that's the logic behind this. Okay. So we have the fiscal year defined here. So for the fiscal year, you have this option here. In the company profile, you can go to fiscal year. In the fiscal year, all that you have to do is you just have to define that what is the structure of your fiscal year and what is the start month of the fiscal year. So, whether your fiscal year starts in January or April, that needs to be defined and saved. Rest Salesforce will automatically do. So like if I say start month is April, Salesforce will automatically calculate the quarter one is April, May, June. Quarter two is July, August, September. That is, it will automatically calculate. All that I need to do is just need to define the start month of the fiscal year. Right? So that's what we do using our fiscal year option here. Go to fiscal year and define the fiscal year. Okay. There's an option called custom fiscal year. This is where you can define a different type of a fiscal year. Normally, a fiscal year has 4 quarters of 3 months each, right? We do have fiscal years of 4 quarters of 3 months each, right? But sometimes companies do have a slightly different structure of the fiscal year. Slightly different structure of the fiscal year means they may have 4 quarters of 13 weeks each. Instead of 3 months, they will have a quarter of 13 weeks. 13 into 4, 52 weeks, right? So different companies or different financial institutions suggest different structures of the fiscal year. 3 months quarter is the most common one. Most of the companies follow this one, right? So in case this is not the structure, then you need to define the custom fiscal year structure. Okay, if you're doing this, see this kind of structure, 4 4 5 structure and all that stuff. So if this kind of a structure is required, then you should change it to the custom fiscal year. But if you are doing that, you are not the one to decide whether you need this structure or that structure, right? So the finance department of the company will tell you that there's a kind of structure, and then you should do it under their guidance that okay, what kind of a structure you need, right? Otherwise, common is standard fiscal year. Don't change it to custom fiscal year till the time you are very sure that they seriously need a different structure. Got it? Because once you have converted it into a custom fiscal year, it cannot be reversed. After enabling customer fiscal year, you cannot revert to the standard fiscal year. So that's the problem, right? So let it be standard fiscal year only initially. Okay. The next thing that you set up for the company, so fiscal year is the other part of information. So fiscal year for reports and forecasts. All right. Then comes the business hours. Okay. Business hours is where you can actually, why do we need to track business hours in Salesforce? Any guesses on that? How will this help tracking business hours in Salesforce? Business hours is what time your company or what time your team works. Anyone? Business hours, why?
Ev-
Yeah,
Every time employees need to submit the time cards for their work. So I think that's why business hours are
mm,
important.
no. Anything, any other thoughts?
Again,
Or,
again the same thing. How many hours of effort is going into generate how much revenue or something?
okay. No, not for that also. Business hours logic is pretty, simple. Basically, what happens with the business hours is, um, since we are talking about CRM as a complete sales, marketing, and support tool, right? So while we are talking about the support activity, we know that we have an option of tracking cases here, right? So when we are taking the customer cases, there is a certain timeline for you to resolve the case. Let's say, a case should ideally be resolved in 20 hours or 24 hours or 30 hours. So when we have those timelines defined here, what we need is we just need to have some sort of business are associated so that those times can be calculated. Got it? So if I say that, okay, this case should be resolved in 20 business hours. If not resolved in 20 hours, it should get escalated. How will that escalation happen if you do not have the business hours defined? So Salesforce needs to know that whether you work from 9 to 6 or you work from 9 to 9. Based on that, it will do the calculation. How many hours need to be calculated? Right? So these cases, um, we have the concept of escalation rules, or for you, I would say automatic escalations. Okay. So in Salesforce, we have this concept of automatic escalation. Automatic escalation, if the case is not resolved within a defined time period, it will be escalated. So for that thing to happen, Salesforce needs to know what is your business hour. So for a given day, should it calculate 10 hours in a day or 15 hours in a day? That's something depends on the way you define the business hours. All right. So you can actually go and define your business hour. Let's say business hours for my support team, say global support team. So what time this global support team works on Sunday, what time it works on Monday and all that. Okay. If it works for 24 hours, you should just select. Okay. So if you want that the escalation should happen based on the full day calculation, then it's fine. But if you want that, okay, the time should be calculated should only be from, let's say, 9 a.m. to 7 p.m., then you should go ahead and change it. Okay, so for this day, it will only calculate time between 9 to 7. So Tuesday, you can again define the same thing. If you don't select anything, then no business hours on that day. Okay, got it. So this ways we can define business hours, and we can actually define business hours, multiple business hours. Okay, select the days and hours that your support team is available. These hours, when associated with escalation rules, I told you all auto escalations, right? Determine the time at which cases can escalate. If you enter blank business hours for a day, that means your organization does not operate on that day. So if you just keep it blank for a certain day, means your organization does not operate on that day. So Saturday and Sunday, if it's not operating, you just say this. That's it. So Monday to Friday, your organization works, and Saturday, Sunday does not work. For example, there is a case which was logged in on a Friday, okay, and your company system is that after 20 hours or 24 hours, it gets escalated. But Ideally, Friday's case should get time till Monday because Saturday, Sunday there is no team which is working. So I need to define it properly. Otherwise, what will happen? All the cases will get escalated on a Saturday, right? Unnecessarily. So
Jeet,
that's how it is. Yeah.
what is a case here? Did I miss it?
Case, a customer ticket complaint case,
Oh, any sort of a.
any sort of case, any sort of a customer complaint. Fine. So we have talked about it that a case comes in and you log in a case with a customer complaint, and then that needs to be closed also. Like when you call a customer care for your any problem that you have with a cell phone or something, they give you a ticket number and then they tell you that okay fine we will resolve it in 2 days or 3 days. They have to give a timeline, right? If it does not get resolved in that timeline, then something should happen. Either it gets escalated or something, right? The same kind of a management is being done here.
Yes.
Correct? Okay.
Thank you.
So that's where the business hour concept is, and then comes the holiday concept. Okay. Now, why do you think we need to track the holidays in CRM so that employees can plan when to take leaves and all? Why do you think we track holidays here? How is that helpful? How will tracking my whole company's
I think the
holidays in
same
CRM?
concept for business.
Sorry?
I think the same concept for same as for business hour for escalation, automatic escalation.
Yes, absolutely correct. So here we are defining the business hours for Monday to Friday. But if there are some Fridays when my team is not working, let's say there is a Wednesday when there is a holiday, so that particular day should also not be calculated, right? Otherwise, again on a holiday there will be all the escalations. So there is a Christmas on a certain day, all the escalations will happen on that day. So that's something which I need to exclude. So holidays are the days when your companies or your team is not working. So you just go to the holidays and define which all days will be holidays and support team will not be available. Holidays are dates and time at which business hours are suspended. So no business hours on those days. Business hours are days and hours that your support team is available. So holidays, my support team will not be available. So that escalations do not happen unnecessarily. Clear on this? So that's about the holidays. So this is how we set up the company's profile. So in the company profile, we have seen that we can set up the basic info of the company, name, phone, address, website kind of thing, local information of the company, which includes currency, time zone, language, fiscal year of the company, when does the fiscal year start for reporting and forecast purpose, business hours of the company so that auto escalations can be supported using the business hours, and the holidays. So these last two things are basically for the escalation purpose. Okay. All right. Now, this is what you can set. Apart from this section actually shows you a little more information on your company, right? What kind of information? If you just click on company information, you get a few generic information about your company, like how much data storage you have and how much file storage you have and how much you have used. Got it? You will see it here. Used data space. So currently you are using 9% of the available data space. Okay. And used file space, currently you are using just 0% of the file space. Okay. So Salesforce, actually when you buy the licenses from Salesforce, they give you two types of spaces. One is for storing data. They give you space for data storage and they give you space for file storage. Data storage is where you store the data, like the ones in the table. File storage is where you can store the documents like PDF, Excel spreadsheet, Microsoft Word document, right? So currently for this Salesforce org, 20 KB of file storage is used, which is almost 0%, and 461 KB of the data is used, right? So you can any point of time come and see that, okay, fine, how much of data storage has been utilized for your company by now? Yeah, how much is pending? Okay, this is your Salesforce organization ID of the Salesforce. So Salesforce org ID is your company's ID. See, ideally, what is happening? Your company is also being listed as a record in Salesforce database, right? So this is the ID of your company. Like you have the ID of your clients, the same way Salesforce has ID of you as a client, right? So your developer org will have an ID, my org will have an ID. So this is the unique ID for your org, right? Then how many licenses? Okay, how many licenses your company has purchased? So the other day we were talking about that developer edition by default gives us 2 licenses. So 2 licenses, out of that I've created one is remaining. Okay, so it will give you a complete information on the licenses also. How many licenses, how many of them have used, and how many are still pending. That's something that we do there. All right. Okay. So company setup, or basically the company profile, is where you get all the information related to company. Then the next thing that we're going to talk about is security and identity confirmation. Okay. So this is one more thing that I want you to understand, which is security and identity confirmation. What is security and identity confirmation? It's the concept where Salesforce, runs. There's a process which Salesforce runs in the backend when you try to log in into Salesforce. So when a user, any user, XYZ user, tries to log in into Salesforce, there's this process which runs in the backend, okay, to check whether the correct person is logging in or not, right? So if I use your login ID password from here, Salesforce will check and try to figure out if you are the right person who is logging in, because it's on cloud, right? So the security has to be there. A little bit of extra security has to be there, right? So how does it work? I will just tell you. There are two things that it checks for: time of login and IP address. Okay. See, what happens with Salesforce is it is on cloud, right? Which means anyone who has a login ID, password, and internet can access it, right? So if somehow I have got your password, I can access it, right? So for any company, security of the data, while putting the data on Salesforce, security is a bit of concern, right? And Salesforce makes sure that they provide enough, security options so that people who do not have access are not allowed to access that sort of thing. All right. So you as a company will have two options to restrict the users. And sometimes the concern is not just about people who do not have access. Sometimes you are also concerned about the internal team. Let's say you have started a business, or you're running a company and you have 10 sales people. You just want your sales team to log in into Salesforce while they are in office. You don't want them to be able to log in after the office hours. Possible, right? Maybe you do not want them to access the database because there can be a data theft or something like that. Maybe you do not want them to access because you seriously don't want them to look into the database after the office hours, right? So for that reason, Salesforce allows you to restrict the users in two ways. One, you can restrict the users by the time, which is like if my office timing is 9 to 6, you have an option of restricting your user by the time. So anyone admin can put two restrictions. One is the time restriction. Let's say time restriction is 9 to 6. Now the person who is trying to log in after 6 p.m. will not be allowed, will be denied access. Got it? So if that restriction is there, then the person who is trying to log in after 6 p.m. will be denied access. The same way, we can have the IP restriction. So an IP range can be defined for the people to log in, and anyone who is trying to log in outside the defined IP range will be denied access. Got it? So what you're trying to do is you're trying to control people logging in only at a certain defined time and only from a certain defined IPv range. Got it? So these two things admin can do. Okay, how to do these two things, we will talk about this later, but basically I'm going to explain you the process of the security check which takes place in the backend once you try to log in. Just give me a minute. Okay, here is the process. You see it on my screen. Security and identity confirmation. So you make a login attempt. This is what happens. First thing Salesforce will do is it will go and do a time check. Okay, in time check, what will it do? It will first of all check whether your administrator has put a restriction on the time or not. Both these options, time restriction and IP restriction, they are optional. None of them is mandatory. Both the things are optional. Optional uh, in the sense your admin can impose those time restrictions, he may not impose the time restrictions. Like the current developer editions that we are using, there is no time restriction, right? So there is no such time restriction imposed on the profile. But if there is a time restriction, then it will check that. All right. The first thing Salesforce will do is it will do a time check. It will check if there is a time restriction. If there is a time restriction, then it will just go ahead and check whether you are trying to log in that defined time range or not. Okay, if you are trying to log in beyond the defined time range, then you will be your login will fail and your access will be denied. Okay, so let's say your administrator has set up the time from 9 to 6 and you're trying to log in at 7 p.m. Then your login attempt will fail and access will be denied. It will give you an error that you are trying to log in outside the time defined. All right. If that's not the case, if there is no time restriction or you are trying to log in within the defined time defined time range, then your login attempt will pass and you will go to the next level of check, which is the IP address check. All right. So there you clear this step and it goes to the next level of check, which is the IP address check. Okay. So with the IP address check, what happens? With the IP check, you can, if there is any IP restriction, again, that is something which is checked. All right. So if the administrator has put an IP restriction, then it will check, are you trying to log in from that particular IP or not? All right. So if you're not logging in from the defined IP, then again your IP thing will fail and it will take you to the next level of check. Okay. But if it passes, your login will be allowed. So here it's like if the IP restriction is there and if it finds that you are logging in from the correct IP address, you are allowed to log in. So you directly log in, you come here. All right. But if that IP check fails, which means if there is an IP restriction and you are trying to log in from an outside IP, which does not fall into that IP defined IP range, then you go to the next level of check, which is the cookies check. Okay. So cookies check is where your computer basically checks your browsing history. So Salesforce will go and check your browsing history to find out whether you logged in from that particular device or that particular IP address before or not. If that's the case, your login will pass. Okay. If that also fails, which means if it does not find any browsing his history information, then that will fail, and then you will be required to get an activation code. Then you will be required to get an activation code to activate your device. Activation code is usually sent either to a registered mobile number or to the registered email ID. So Salesforce is trying to make sure that anyone who is trying to log in from an IP address which is not the trusted IP address do the activation of that particular device using the activation code. It's like one-time password that you receive while you're trying to log in into your uh, internet banking or something. Got it? So this is how the process is. Starts from login attempt, does a time check. If time check fails, access is denied. If it passes, goes to the IP check. IP check, if passes, goes to the login. If it fails, then another level of check, cookies check, which checks the browsing history. If cookies check fails, then activation code. If the cookies check passes, then the login is allowed. Got it?
Yeah,
Tell me
Jeet,
if there is a
one
question.
doubt.
Yep.
Uh, can I carry on?
Yeah, yep, sure.
Okay. Lastly, what happened is I cleared my history. I mean search history or browsing history,
Hmm.
and after which, like when I tried to log in to the system as in the Salesforce platform, it asked for the activation code.
Right.
I mean, I tried logging in from my same laptop. So, I mean, as per your, the explanation, like, the system or Salesforce should have checked my IP, right? I mean, since the time check is not there for developer edition,
Hmm.
if in case, like, the Salesforce have checked my IP address, then it should have allowed me to log in, right? Without an activation code.
No. Tell me again. What did you do? You
What I
cleared the
did is
browsing history. Uh-huh.
I deleted the browsing history,
Hmm.
and after which, after then, like when I tried logging into the Salesforce,
Then it asks for activation code,
asked
right?
for activation code. Yeah, one activation
Correct.
code was sent to my mobile number.
Hmm.
But my doubt was, like, since you said, like, if the time zone is not there, then it will automatically go and check the IP address of the
But have you
system.
defined the IP address? That's the thing. You have not yet defined the IP address.
Oh, okay, all
So
right,
it
okay.
asked for activation code. It's absolutely fine then working from.
Okay, got it, Jit. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
So
All
if you
right.
do not define an IP range, then it will consider every IP range as a new one. So it is not, no one is known to it.
Okay,
So if you
got it.
define the IP range, then it will go and check whether you're logging in from that particular IP or not. Secondly, it
Mm-hmm.
goes and checks the cookies check. So right now, all those every day when you log in into your Salesforce
Mm-hmm.
and you find that Salesforce does not ask you for a verification code, that's because there is this information in your cookies in your browsing history,
Okay.
right? So that's the thing.
All right. All right. Thanks.
All right. So now there is one small question that I have. Just think about it and let me know. What do you think can be the reason? When so there are two types of restriction that we're talking about here, right? We're talking about the time check, where the admin can restrict the user to log in at a certain time. And then there is this IP restriction, okay, time restriction and IP restriction, that two things we're talking about. But for the time check, you see, the moment it fails, access is denied directly. It fails, access denied. IP check, it fails, it goes to this other option, cookies check. Again fails, goes to the other option of activation code. What do you think can be the reason? Out of these two things, time restriction, it's being very strict on that, and it's being a lot more lenient when it comes to the IP check. What may be the reason for that? Anyone? Any thoughts? You got my point, right? What I'm trying to
I think
say.
the time.
Hmm. Go
I think
ahead.
the time restriction, because we have the developer edition, we cannot do the time check. But if there is a company set up in real time, time check, they can set up the time check, and it's more critical. And developer edition can do the cookie check and activation.
In developer edition also we can do the time check. I'm talking about generic process. It's not about developer edition. It's about any other edition, right?
Can you repeat the question, Ajit? I
The
didn't got it.
question is, why is it so strict about the time check and why is it so lenient about the IP check? You see, IP check fails and again it gives it a second chance. Then it again fails and it gives a third chance. You see this process, no? IP check fails, again it goes to the other level of check. When time check fails, straight away access denied.
Okay.
Do you think that's a bit of partiality?
Nothing like that. If your IP might vary, right? For example,
Right.
I'm on site working from US and you're in India. You move to a different location. Uh, then
Right.
the credential need not change.
Right. Absolutely correct. So basically, it's as you said, that IP can change. I might need, that's the advantage of Salesforce basically, and that's the biggest advantage that Salesforce actually carries. That it's independent of location. Now, if it becomes very very strict on the IP address and does not allow any person to log in outside a certain defined IP range, then it's nothing better than a local database server. It becomes as good as a local database server. So that does not resolve the purpose of the companies going for something like Salesforce, which is on cloud, right? You might be on the client location, you might be working from home on a certain day, and you still need to access it, right? So that's for the IP restriction, or for the IP thing. That's the reason why it's a little lenient. I might need to access your account from here, from India, that sort of thing, right? But while it's allowing you to log in from a different IP address, which is not there in the trusted range of IP address, still it makes sure that you are just, kind of getting the activation code to make sure that no wrong person is using it, right? So you get the activation code, and which means you're taking the responsibility kind of for if there is something wrong happens with that particular login attempt, or after that login is done. Got it? So that's how it is. So they try to balance between the security thing, the concept of the security, and the concept of the flexibility of location that they actually promise, or that's which is the basically unique selling point for Salesforce. Here, please let me know if you have any questions or doubts here for the security and identity confirmation.
Can you please explain again why time check is so critical?
See,
I got the idea why IP check is not that critical, but why time check is that much critical? Like if it fail, access is denied.
yes, I mean, any check has to be critical only. So why time check is critical, there is no answer to that, because if I put a restriction, that restriction has to work. So there is no reason for, like if you say, your bank says that, okay, fine, you have to sign and then only they will give you money. So you cannot ask for a reason why I have to sign, why my neighbor cannot sign and get the money from me. So there is no reason for that. But
Okay.
sometimes if there is a special privilege which is being given, there can be a reason to that. So there is no reason for security. Security is always good. But yeah, there can be a reason for the leniency. Like
Mm.
school or your office, attendance is a must. There is no reason for that. You cannot ask that why attendance is must. Got it? So if that is being done, if they are critical on this part, this is good. Basically, what we'll have to do is we are more concerned about why there is a bit of leniency on this, right?
Mm.
Comparatively, why it is a little more lenient. So
Okay.
here, the security is being given a little flexibility because that's where the advantage. And again, here they are managing it with the activation code.
Activation.
Yeah. So they are trying to make sure that the right person is accessing it from some other location. A different person is not accessing it. All right. But no matter how much activation code and all those things you have, if you're trying to log in outside a defined time range, it will not allow you to log in. So yeah, that part is
Okay.
pretty much strict.
Mm. Okay.
Correct?
Okay.
All right. Yep. So that's what we are going to talk today, and tomorrow once we meet, we are going to talk, on the data management part, right? So a few small concepts that I actually wanted to make sure that we cover and talk about. So these are very important for you. All right. So I'll see you all tomorrow. It's going to be same time, same meeting link. Thank you. Bye.